In March of 1911, one of the greatest loss of life in Mono County occurred when an avalanche destroyed the brand new Jordan power plant up on Cowper Mountain. This is that story, a story of disaster, destruction, and death. So like so many other stories in this county, it's also a story of Bodie. Bodie, a mining town founded in the 1870s, and at times it was one of the larger cities, even in the state. And it could have been the largest city in this county for as much as 50 years. Well, one thing, Bodie had it all. Bodie, besides mines, had churches, had saloons, had schools, had homes, hotels. One thing it didn't have was a source of power. For mines, that can mean running water to turn equipment that would turn pumps and raise hoists and run rock crushers, or at least a steam engine that might be powered by wood. The source of power out in town would be wood to heat your home, to help cook your food, maybe to help you make candles to light your way at night. But Bodie had no wood, no trees, and the nearest running water was off in the Sierras. So they had a problem to build a town of some 8,000 people in the middle of nowhere. And they solved it by bringing in wood, lots and lots of wood. Bodie had a habit that at its peak represented 300 cords of wood every day. Cord is 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet of firewood. Imagine needing 300 of those one day, and the next day you need another 300, and so on with the day after that. So having wood as a source of fuel for the steam engines and heat and cooking heat was such severe that, and it was caused mostly by this guy here, the Standard Consolidated Mill and Mine. And it got so severe that they invested in a railway, 32 miles long. They extended it all the way down to the Jeffrey Pine Forest, the south of Mono Lake. And it ran for 10 years before they had another solution. This came into being in the 1880s and continued to bring wood in, but not enough. This guy here, this is Thomas Leggett. He was the superintendent or manager of the Standard Consolidated Mine and Mill for 5 years in the early 1890s. And he had a problem. He was spending $22,000 every year just on firewood for the mill and the mine. And he wanted to cut that expense any way he could. Well, he was a mining engineer and he was a technologist. And he was very interested in the developments in electrical distribution and utilization of electricity, both in lighting and in rotating motors. And he followed very closely what was going on the eastern side of the United States, where Thomas Edison's Edison Company and George Westinghouse's Westinghouse Company were vying for electrical power generation. Westinghouse had an AC technology designed by Nikola Tesla, and Edison stuck with the simpler DC technology. DC had a problem though. DC, you cannot easily change the voltage, which meant that you did not want to have very high voltages and you couldn't distribute it very far. Whereas AC, you could use a thing called a transformer, where you could raise the voltage to an arbitrarily high level, transmit it at that high voltage, and then reduce it back to a usable voltage at the other end. So it seemed to Thomas Leggett that AC was a technology that would allow him to bring power from the source, which he realized was going to have to be the running water of the Sierra Nevada, all the way to Bodie. So he talked to his boss, this guy here, J.S. Kane, and convinced him that it was time to invest in a power line. And this was the route of the power they decided. The nearest source of running water that he could find was Green Creek, almost straight west into the Sierra Nevada, about 13 miles away. And there's the route that was proposed. And here's the document that accompanied the loan papers. And you can see that it was very straight. And this was to save on copper. If you have to buy less copper, you also would lose less power through the resistance of increased length of copper. It was not, as Ella Kane repeated her mother's theory about worrying about electricity jumping off wires. It's just cheaper. Oddly enough, though, if you look at this, you'll see the telephone line was not run on the same poles that the power line was. It established a different route. But to refresh you, this crossed what is now 395 down by Dogtown, just south of the Bodie Road, and then on to Bodie north of 270. And you can see by the elevations down here that Bodie is indeed higher than Green Creek by about 1,000 feet. So they built a dam out on Green Creek to give it a consistent source of water. You can see the spillways over there. And then they built a powerhouse. One periodical says this was the Green Creek powerhouse. Another says this was the Green Creek powerhouse. Obviously, two different buildings. But the Clampers celebrated it, and they pointed out very plainly, which is also pointed out in those document papers, that this was made by the Standard Consolidated Mining Company. This was not there to light the homes of Bodie or to heat them. It was to heat this, to drive the machinery. And even though it was an AC technology was selected for this, the generators put out about 3,500 volts. And by the time it reached Bodie, 13 miles away, it was down to about 3,100 through losses. And then the single transformer ever used on this line was a step down, which delivered 100 volts to the superintendent's office over here to light a light bulb. And that was the only transformer and the only use other than turning the single motor inside the consolidated mine. So, and it didn't do anything to light up Bodie, but it did indeed decrease the expenses of the Standard Consolidated Mine and reduce the amount of wood that was used in the town. So J.S. Kane, though, always had this image in his mind. This is a picture from Bodie once it was electrified from 1912. Now, the Green Creek came online in 1892, so it was 20 years before anybody but the Standard Consolidated Mine got to have electrification in the town of Bodie. But J.S. Kane knew that there is something to sell. He was, above all, a businessman. And he bided his time, and he tried to figure out how he could sell this product. Well, the electrical technology continued to develop, and eventually J.S. Kane was able to have this dream. Here's his Green Creek power plant that in 1892 was powering the Consolidated Standard Mine, but that didn't have all that much power available, not that much falling water. But if he were to go down to Lundy Canyon is quite a big watershed and delivers a lot of water that could be used to generate power. So through activities that are best described by Bob Marks, he acquired rights to the falling water coming out of the Sierra Nevada. And he envisioned building not one, but two power plants. Here is you can see it says Jordan plant right here. And just below Lundy Lake had a fall about halfway down to Mono Lake. What's not shown on this is J.S. Kane decided that he could reuse this water because it's going to fall another 12 or 1,300 feet to get down to Mono Lake, and put a second power plant down here on the shore of Mono Lake and generate power again using the same water. So that was his plan from the beginning. And he saw that if he had that much more power and 20 years further development on the technology, he could deliver power not only to Bodie, but on to Aurora, Lucky Boy, and all the way out to the Wonder Mine, 150 miles away, almost in the middle of Nevada. So this was J.S. Kane's image. And he was able to start on it in 1910. And he selected as a site this. This is Copper Mountain over here. And this road off to the left, this is the road up Lundy Canyon. And you'll notice Lundy Canyon is over beyond this moraine. Usually you will build a power plant at the bottom of a canyon below a lake. But in this case, J.S. Kane decided to build it on the other side of the moraine and bring the water through and around the moraine. The reason he did this is in the 1890s, this was the site of a copper mine. The Goleta, let's get this right, Goleta Consolidated Mining Company had two adits up here. They had a copper smelter, and they had a small settlement that they called Jordan for reasons that I can't find explained. And if you look very closely today, there's a horizontal line running across here. This is the site of a waterway bringing water from Lundy Lake, which is behind these hills, all the way to the copper mine. And it was diverted also down to the copper smelting plant, which is down here on the floor. And so J.S. Kane, always looking to save money, he said, why reinvent something? Let's put it the same place the copper guys did. And he used the routing of all of those waterways to site his power plant. And that's why the Jordan power plant is where it is. Well, the copper mine disappeared in the early 1900s. It had been gone for years by 1910. So it was easy to buy up the land, and we had a route to follow. So they started building the Jordan power plant. And they built outbuildings, and they built housing for the employees and for the superintendent and his wife. And they built it, and you can see the waterways coming down here. This is the path that the Goleta copper mine used. And all of the material was brought in by rail to Hawthorne, where it was moved by horse and wagon. And at that time, the route of the 167 didn't exist, so everything went over Lucky Boy Pass through Aurora. Most of the equipment for the two power plants was stored in Aurora until they were ready for it. This was the day that the wagons brought the generators in. Here's one of the generators being installed in the Jordan power plant. And this is not the panel of the Jordan power plant, but it's a similar one. This is from Folsom, and it's made the same way. You can see these massive knife switches, probably have 1,000 volts across those exposed giant terminals. So don't trip and fall. And this is marble. Marble is an excellent insulator, so you could put high potentials across copper pieces there. So this would be the type of switching panel that would be on the side of the Jordan power plant. And we know it was there for another reason. We'll get to that. And here's the day when the pipe showed up. The waterways of the copper miners just wasn't big enough, so we had to replace their piping with this. But they dug a trench in the same direction that the copper had used it, and they put piping in it. And then they went up to Lundy Lake and they built a dam to raise the water level to give them a consistent supply of water. And it turned on December 25th, Christmas Day, 1910. The citizenry of Bodie's had quite a surprise. Suddenly, J.S. Kane's vision took shape. And if you were in Bodie, suddenly you had electric lights in your saloon and in your home. And if you wanted to make toast, you didn't need to start a fire. You could just plug it in. And electric heaters in the middle of winter, this must have been quite a remarkable change. So this proved to be pretty reliable through the last few days of 1910 and the first couple of months of the winter of 1910-11. But the winter of 1910-11 was something else. And on February 22nd, a major blizzard hit, and it continued unabated for 3 weeks. And by March 8th, over 28 feet had fallen in Bodie itself. And this photograph was taken sometime later, but you can see the snow would have melted back, but you can see that they would dig holes just to get to any front door of any building in Bodie. But they were snug, they were warm, they had their electric heat until just past midnight in the morning of March 8th, 1911, the power went out, the lights went out. There happened to be, in Bodie at the time, an employee of the Pacific Power Company, which is the official name of the Jordan Power Plant operating company. Paul Greenleaf had been working on the transmission line up to the Lucky Boy mine in Nevada. And he was coming back home to Jordan when he stopped and to wait out the blizzard in Bodie. And it's a lucky thing he did. Well, the citizens, probably the only one awake at that time, had been in the saloons. So they found Mr. Greenleaf, they woke him up and they said, "Hey, your power's out." So he went to the office and he picked up the phone, and there's a phone line that followed the poles this time all the way to the power plant, but the line was dead. So the line must be out. This devil of a storm must have taken out the line. So he gets his equipment, gets tools necessary to fix the break in the line, and he starts to walk the line. And he walks from Bodie with one helper, and they inspect every pole along the line. So this takes some time. They get down out of the Bodie Hills and they get to the Scandavino Ranch, and one of the Scandavino sons joins them, and they inspect all the poles all the way, and everything looks fine. They get to about where 395 is now, and they go over a little rise, and they don't see the power plant. They see nothing but a mile-wide bank of snow. It's obvious an avalanche has struck Jordan. So our friend Mr. Greenleaf had one of these with him. This is a butt set. This is the standard telephone lineman's tool. So he got up to the top of a pole, clipped on the line, and he called back to Bodie, where he was able to get through. And he gives them the message: the power plant's been destroyed, been covered by an avalanche. People are buried alive. If you want to get a miner's attention, use the term buried alive. Well, this was in the evening of March 8th by the time that Greenleaf and his party made it all the way to Jordan. And people in Bodie then organized quickly. And the next morning, over 100 of them, 100 miners out of a town that probably had a population of less than 1,000 at the time, They started out in the middle of the blizzard with shovels and on their snowshoes, and about a third of them had to turn back before they'd gone far. They simply weren't prepared for the ferocity of the blizzard. And they got all the way to Bodie, 16 miles away, and they got there, and it was too late to start anything. They went to the Conway Ranch, and they spent the night. And they're joined by farmers and Indians in the valley, everyone with a shovel. And the next morning, the morning of March 9th, they started digging in earnest. And they weren't sure where to dig. There was very little sticking above. In some cases, there was some hints, so they would dig down and they'd find some equipment. And this was photographed from much later. But they told stories of digging holes, and then the loose snow would start flowing in on top of them, so they had to run for their lives. And then they had to go back and retrieve their shovels and dig those holes out again. They dug and they dug for 6 to 8 hours until the middle of the afternoon, and they heard from somewhere, from under the snow, they heard a dog. Now, some accounts say the dog was barking, some say it's whining, but it was life. Underneath the snow, there's obviously an air pocket, and they suddenly had a place to dig, and they all jumped on it, and they found Mrs. Agnes Mason, the superintendent's wife, still alive under the snow after 62 hours of being buried. What had happened was she was in bed next to her husband when the avalanche hit. The avalanche pushed over their concrete wall, crushing and killing her husband in bed next to her. But she had a steamer trunk next to her side of the bed that was stout enough that the wall stopped on it, giving her an airspace, perhaps 4, perhaps 5 inches high, just enough for her to survive. And her dog Shep German Shepherd was underneath the bed, trapped as well. Apparently there was a broken vent pipe somewhere because she didn't suffocate. She had enough clean air during that time. So, but she had spent the prior 2.5 days with her leg trapped, forced against her dead husband's body. Well, they got Mrs. Mason out quickly, and they got her over to the Conway Ranch nearby, where they had spent the night. And Mrs. Conway was an ex-nurse, and she did what she could. She rehydrated Mrs. Mason and gave her some food and looked at her gangrenous leg and told the men that they needed to get her to Bodie, to the doctor at Bodie, as fast as possible. So they fastened a sled for her. And this is a recreation photograph, but it shows the concept. Some sources say 4 men pulled it, some say 8 men pulled it with harnesses. But whatever it was, they would ski until they were tired, and then another group would take over and they'd ski until they were tired, and so on until they got all the way to Bodie, where the doctor sterilized Mrs. Mason's leg and got her on a sleigh and wagon. By now the blizzard had abated, and got her all the way to the railhead at Hawthorne, where she got on a train and was taken to a hospital in Oakland, where they amputated her leg. When Mrs. Mason came back to the valley, there was a new power plant that had just come onto line, and she was given a job for life as the receptionist. So what was happening while she was in Oakland is they were trying to make some sense of the destruction. The generators, the massive generators, were slid 500 feet down the hill. They were remarkably upright at this time, but the devastation was just about complete. However, if you remember, there was a second set of plans and equipment for a second power plant in Aurora already. It was supposed to be down by the shores of Mona Lake. Well, they quickly brought it up and built it where the Mill Creek power plant stands today. It's about, perhaps half a mile further from the hillside than the Jordan power plant was. Hopefully this is far enough away. And here's a photograph from just after it's constructed. They still had all the housing for all the workers as they built it up. They rerouted the water over to here, and now you can visit this today. And perhaps if you're really silver-tongued and there's somebody there, you could talk your way into it. This is a photograph from inside the Mill Creek Power Plant. And remember, this is the twin of Jordan. So everything you see here had a duplicate purchased and installed in the Jordan power plant. But this is right now, you can go visit this. This is still here, now owned and operated by Southern California Edison, generating power when it's needed. What you'll also find is this strange thing. Just behind the power plant, you can see the Mill Creek Power Plant is there in the background. This is copper slag, and this dates from when the copper miners were there, smelting copper. And here's a photograph from when Jordan Power Plant was just finished. You can see far right, that's part of the Jordan facility. You can see that pile of copper slag was abandoned even then in 1910. Well, if you drive along the road, you'll find other stuff near the site of the Jordan Power Plant. A bunch of detritus, foundations. And if you keep driving on the road, you'll come to this. This is a cemetery about maybe 2 miles further into the road. And the people killed that night are buried here. Interestingly enough, there are 8 people buried here when there are 7 people killed in Jordan. The 8th was a man who was working in a smaller power plant in Lundy Canyon that was killed by another avalanche in that same night. Remarkable coincidence. For their headstones, the marble of that panel that was broken apart from the Jordan power plant. And if you look at the cemetery, you'll see that it's remarkably well tended. All the fencing is in good shape. The posts look recently painted. There's no weeds to speak of. The cemetery is maintained and cared for by employees of the Mill Creek Power Station, honoring their linemen who gave their lives 120 years ago. And we finish here with the Bridgeport Chronicle Union, whose slogan is a united and greater Eastern California. Looks good, sounds good, and is good. Work for it. And I think it's appropriate that their words close tonight. Like a thief in the night, the mountainside came to the valley, took the lives of those in its path, leaving broken hearts and desolate homes in its wake. As soon as news of the calamity was known, willing hands took up the work of rescuing those who perchance might be alive, or the bodies of those beyond human aid. The mines of Bodie are closed, and an army of shovelers are opening a road to Copper Mountain, 20 miles distant. I adore the writing of that era. So that is my report for the night. Thank you for attending. Are there any questions?
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Rich.
It says pretty remarkable place, a pretty remarkable story.
Hey, Rich, it's Chris Leitza. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, that was a fantastic presentation. The pictures are amazing, and you've done a lot of great research. My question is, you talk about them walking the line in 28 feet of snow or whatever it was, which would be a serious post-holing if you were walking in shoes. So what information do you have about what they were wearing on their feet, be it snowshoes or skis? Because I've read about the rescue a little bit, and they collected a large number of skis and people apparently who were able to use them somewhat properly. So there must have been a bunch of skis, and if they had them there, then
Yeah, but snowshoes
was that
were
was that how
skis.
they patrolled the line with skis? Do you have any information on that?
Well, it's my understanding that these are snowshoes. I guess they were called back then, and I think they were pretty common. I don't think you could have traveled at all without some heavy level of support. These guys seem to have the little knobs back here that Louis Deschambault's skis were. So we probably saw a lot of those. That's my theory anyway. Post holding, I don't think you can get 100 yards, much less 16 miles.
Right, and part of the confusion comes from skis were called snowshoes back in that era. So I don't know how they would have been distinguished in the literature.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear all of that, Chris.
Sorry, yeah, because back in that era, skis were indeed called snowshoes, but there were also snowshoes as we know them, the rackets. So I don't know how the reportage of the day would have distinguished those two devices.
Well, let's see, if we only had a Bodie historian with us. So Chris Speller, what do you find in the museum in Bodie? Do you find classic snowshoes that we would call snowshoes, or are they all skis like this?
I think we have both. And yes, it is true that when you see the reference to snowshoes, they're usually talking about skis, what we call skis. But yeah, there were snowshoes too. And I know there were snowshoes for horses. We do have that in the museum.
Yeah, I can't conceive of moving around in a recent blizzard without something on your feet.
Yeah, if you live there, you can attest to that.
Rich, in the chat, there's a question. Any more info on Mono Lake Powerhouse plan?
You mean the second one?
I guess so, yeah.
I guess so. I have that was a little aside in one of the, I don't remember what source I ran across that, but it makes sense because the Mill Creek Power Station was online in a matter of months after the Jordan Power Plant was destroyed. So all of that stuff had to exist for it to come into being so quickly. Now, the one thing I have heard is that the elevation of the second power plant was like 14 feet, vertical feet above the surface of Mono Lake. So that would give basically the same kind of head of water that would power the Jordan power plant would have been used again with about the same fall to power the other power plant.
Yeah, Rich, I can add to that and tell you where that comes from. Charles, this is Bob Marks. Let me get my video going.
Yeah.
Okay, so Charles Poole was the engineer designing all of this, and he wrote a very long report on the building of the Jordan plant, and indicated that they were planning to build that second power plant down below, and actually had the amount of money that was spent for it and where it was coming from, and so there's documentation on that, but that's where that comes from.
Any idea just where it was going to be sited?
No idea. They didn't talk about that, but my guess would have been it must have been on Mill Creek, one would think, but maybe where what ultimately became Wilson Creek, because the water was coming out of the spillway and going into what became Wilson Creek. So maybe there. It's not clear what they were thinking of.
Yeah, could have been alongside the county park.
Yep.
Dave, you have your hand up?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rich, I'm just totally blown away. This is a fantastic presentation and great images. I was curious about the image of the skiing rescuers, and there's one that we have in the museum that has all these names penciled in, naming the people in the picture. But I'm assuming it's the same picture, and you say that is I've never realized that's a reenactment, and I wonder why and when did they do this for the newspaper, or why did they have a reenactment? Was it part of maybe a memorial service time, or do you know anything about that?
Well, that it's an assumption made by a few things. First of all, when they actually did move Mrs. Mason, I'm sure they were just falling all over themselves to get going, so they didn't have time to line up and have a photographer set up. They probably got out of there as fast as possible. And some of the photographs have things like words printed superimposed where I'm pointing my
Right
in there, and so I'm led to believe that it's not done at the moment of withdrawing her from there. So
the one in the museum has these words like somebody had the print and they had written in identifying names. So if next time when the museum's open in May, if people want to come, maybe they can take a look at that, and also at some of the DeChambeau skis that we have on display up on high on the wall in the museum.
Yeah. Also, the existence of this horse and sleigh combination here sounds like something that wouldn't just be wandering around. And where's the blizzard? It's pretty clear.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, interesting to round the people up, get a photographer, and pull that off. I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah. And if you read the sources, and it sounds like I've got sources I haven't discovered yet, they all differ slightly. There was one that had a photograph of, quote unquote, the power plant after the destruction. Well, if the building they're showing was still upright, so it obviously was mislabeled. So, Ellen, do you have a question? Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself. Or Ellen, you're still muted if you're trying to ask. Usually the bottom left. Oh, there you go.
Okay, sorry about that. So there's a question in the chat from Chris Spiller about the big pipe that you can see. And it's actually to let the air out. As the water comes down from Lundy Lake, it's pushing a huge volume of air in front of it. And so that big pipe is actually like a giant chimney, and the air goes up the chimney and the water continues downhill.
All right. Let's see. Can you see it? And whoop, there we go. There.
You can't really see it in that picture. It's
yeah,
just north of.
Yeah.
It's just to the left of the copper part of Copper Mountain. It's really ugly, and I wish they had painted a different color.
This is Bob Marks adding to that. Those are called standpipes.
Right.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep.
Yeah, if you travel along the road in front of Williams Butte on top of the aqueduct, you can see a bunch of standpipes coming up to relieve air pressure.
Okay, Rich, there's some other questions in the chat.
Thank you for your forbearance. I had yesterday, I thought I had 28 days and 30 hours to prepare. It turned out I had 30 hours to prepare. Was the woman that survived working? Oh, I'm sorry. Agnes Mason was the wife of the superintendent. And her husband that she was pinned next to was in charge of everything.
Not them.
That survived. Yeah, she was the one who was hired at the Mill Creek power plant, given a job for life.
Oh, Chris wants to say something, but Rich, I just wanted to make a comment on the various names: Jordan Plant, and then Mill Creek Plant, and then back to Jordan Plant. And what when SCE bought the plant in 1964, they bought all this operations up here, all the hydro plants. It was called the Mill Creek plant then, but SCE already had a Mill Creek plant someplace else, and so they changed it back to Jordan.
Yeah, down in Riverside County.
Yeah.
They changed it back to Jordan?
Yes.
News to me.
Well, it had been Lundy at 1909, 1910, and then it was Lundy, Jordan. They refer to it both ways. But then when the SE bought in 64, they changed it away from Mill Creek because it was already another Mill Creek.
Wow.
So there's many.
Okay. Hello, San Francisco.
Hi, I'm not Jim, but it's San Francisco, so maybe I am. I have a question. The physical therapist in the audience, when Mrs. Mason went back to work, had she gotten a prosthesis? How functional was she? Are there any photos of her at her desk?
That grainy photo is the only one I ever found of. And you know, some sources are quick to point out that the German Shepherd was named Shep and it came back with her, but you can decide whether or not you believe that.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's a haze of a century between us and this.
Okay, are there any more questions for Rich before we close the program for tonight?
I would like to thank this audience. 40 people zoomed in. We had very short notice. I don't know how many of you got the notice that we were going to change the program. You're a great group. And if you're not a member of the Mono Basin Historical Society, we would encourage you to take care of that. Go to our website and join. But irrespective, coming to our meetings, coming to hear our great speakers is really, really important. We will let you know about next month's program. As soon as, Chris, you're talking over me, I think. Yeah, we'll let you all know as soon as we know what happens next month.
Thanks, Dave. So finally, Rich, I really want to convey all our thanks to you. You had like less than 24 hours notice of volunteering for this. I'm not sure how much volunteering there was when Dave actually called you, but thank you very much. That was an incredible talk. And I've learned a lot more about Bodie and Jordan. It's just wonderful. Thanks again from all of us. And to everybody else online, thank you for being with us tonight. And we will see you again in 1 month's time.
Yay.
So with that, good night, everybody.